Daniel Hall stepped off the plane, fatigue weighing heavily on his shoulders after a long business trip abroad. As he drove through familiar roads, a sense of anticipation filled him. He looked forward to reuniting with his family and the comforting embrace of their beloved farm. However, as he turned onto the lane that led to his childhood home, the sight that awaited him twisted his stomach into knots. Where there should have been sprawling fields dotted with wildflowers, and the rustic charm of their farmhouse stood an imposing structure. A towering hotel, its glass facade glinting menacingly in the sunlight. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. His family's cherished heritage, passed down through generations, had vanished. The farm that had nurtured his family's dreams was replaced by a monstrous development orchestrated by none other than Karen Langley, the ruthless president of the Homeowners Association. Daniel's heart raced with a mix of anger and disbelief as he parked his car and stepped out. The hotel loomed over him, a symbol of corporate greed and local corruption. Memories flooded back, his grandfather teaching him how to plant crops, laughter shared during harvests, and the love that infused every corner of their land. All of it was gone in an instant, replaced by concrete and profit-driven ambition. Determined not to let this injustice stand unchallenged, Daniel began to investigate what had transpired during his absence. He quickly uncovered alarming evidence of corruption, secret deals woven into the fabric of local politics, and manipulated paperwork that dated back decades. Each revelation deepened his resolve to reclaim not only his family's land, but also their legacy. As he dug deeper into the situation, Daniel stumbled upon a treasure trove of meticulous documentation left behind by his grandfather. It detailed every transaction and agreement related to their property, providing vital insight into the legal loopholes that had allowed Karen Langley to execute her plan. This documentation became Daniel's greatest weapon in the fight ahead, but he knew he couldn't do it alone. Rallying support from the community became essential as neighbors rallied behind him in solidarity against the HOA's overreach. With new evidence surfacing about ecological violations linked to the hotel's construction, Daniel found himself at the center of a burgeoning movement determined to restore what had been taken from them. With each passing day, Daniel prepared for the battle ahead, one that would take him to court against Karen Langley. He understood that this fight was not just for his family's farm, but for justice and integrity in their community. As he looked at the towering hotel one last time before heading home, he felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. He was ready to confront the forces that believed they were above the law and reclaim what was rightfully his. Karen Langley stood behind the sleek glass doors of the newly constructed hotel, her presence commanding and formidable. As the president of the Homeowners Association, she had meticulously orchestrated the transformation of Daniel Hall's family's cherished farm into a sprawling luxury establishment. Known for her ruthless ambition and cunning tactics, Karen had built a reputation in their small town as a woman who would stop at nothing to achieve her goals. With a background in real estate development and an uncanny ability to manipulate local politics, Karen had positioned herself as a gatekeeper of progress, often cloaking her greed in the guise of community improvement. To her supporters, she was a visionary. To those who opposed her, she was a tyrant, wielding her power with an iron fist. She thrived on control, using her charm and calculated rhetoric to sway public opinion while quietly lining the pockets of local officials. Daniel's return home marked a turning point in Karen's unchecked reign. He was not just a man returning to reclaim his land, he was a direct challenge to her authority and a reminder of the values she trampled underfoot. As news spread about Daniel's determination to fight back, Karen felt the pressure mounting. She had invested too much in this project, both financially and politically, to let one man and his community stand in her way. Karen employed various underhanded tactics to maintain her grip on power. She inundated town meetings with supporters who echoed her views, drowning out dissenting voices. When faced with opposition, she would use intimidation, threatening legal action against anyone who dared challenge her decisions. Her connections allowed her access to influential figures who could help squash any potential resistance before it gained traction. As Daniel began to rally community support against Karen's actions, she responded with calculated maneuvers designed to undermine his efforts. She spread misinformation, painting him as an outsider looking to disrupt progress for personal gain. Her influence extended into local media outlets, where she spun narratives that portrayed Daniel as a troublemaker rather than a guardian of local heritage. But beneath the surface of Karen's polished exterior lay a deep-seated fear of losing control and being exposed for her unethical dealings. The more Daniel uncovered about the corrupt dealings surrounding the hotel's development, the more desperate she became. As evidence emerged linking her actions to ecological violations and financial mismanagement, Karen knew that this battle was escalating beyond mere politics. In this high-stakes game of power and deception, Daniel represented not just his family, but the community's fight for justice against Karen Langley's relentless ambition. With each passing day, it became clearer that this was not merely a conflict over land. It was a struggle against corruption itself, with Daniel determined to shine a light on the dark underbelly of greed that Karen embodied. He was ready to confront her manipulation head-on, armed with the truth and a community that had finally awakened to the reality of their situation. Fueled by a mix of anger and determination, Daniel Hall stood at the edge of what was once his family's beloved farm, now overshadowed by the stark reality of a towering hotel. The land had been in his family for generations, a sanctuary filled with memories, traditions, and hard work. With each passing moment, the weight of loss pressed heavier on his heart. It wasn't just about reclaiming property, it was about fighting for his heritage, for the legacy that his ancestors had built with love and sacrifice. Daniel could picture his grandfather walking those fields, teaching him the rhythms of farming and sharing stories that connected their family to the land. Each tree and patch of earth held a memory, a rite of passage, a lesson learned, or a holiday celebrated. To see it replaced by commercial greed felt like a betrayal, not only to himself but to every family member who had poured their blood, sweat, and tears into that land. As he stood there grappling with the enormity of what had happened, Daniel's resolve solidified. He realized that he had to fight not only for his family's history, but also for the future of the community that had thrived alongside their farm. The hotel was not just an eyesore, it represented a shift in values, one where profit trumped legacy and development overshadowed preservation. Daniel began to mobilize support within the community, sharing his story and encouraging others to join him in this fight against Karen Langley and her HOA. He spoke passionately about the importance of heritage, urging neighbors to recognize that their own histories were at stake. This was not merely a battle for one man's land. It was a stand against an encroaching tide of corporate interests that threatened to erase their shared identity. With each meeting organized and every flyer distributed, Daniel felt a spark igniting among his fellow townspeople. They began to rally around the cause, understanding that this fight transcended personal grievances. It was about preserving what made their community unique and vibrant. As they united in purpose, Daniel felt a renewed sense of hope. He was no longer alone in this struggle. He had become the voice of many who were unwilling to let their past be erased. In the days that followed, Daniel immersed himself in research, digging into local records and histories that would bolster their case against the HOA. He uncovered documents revealing how the land had been treated over generations, a testament to sustainable farming practices and respect for nature. His grandfather's meticulous notes became a guiding light through this process, offering strategies and insights into how best to confront their adversaries. Daniel knew that winning back his family's heritage would be no easy task. Yet with every piece of evidence he gathered and every voice he amplified within the community, he felt more empowered. This was not just about reclaiming land. It was about embracing their shared identity and standing firm against forces that threatened to rewrite their history. Together, they would fight for justice, not just for themselves, but for future generations who deserved to inherit a legacy worth preserving. As Daniel delved deeper into the situation surrounding his family's lost farm, the layers of corruption began to unravel before him like a tightly wound spool of thread. What had initially seemed like a personal tragedy quickly morphed into a larger investigation, revealing a complex web of deceit and manipulation that connected the homeowners association to various local officials and developers. Armed with determination and the meticulous documentation left by his grandfather, Daniel started to gather evidence that would expose the extent of the HOA's illegal activities. He visited town halls and scoured public records, looking for any discrepancies or signs of wrongdoing. With each document he unearthed, the picture grew clearer: secret deals hidden in bureaucratic jargon, manipulated paperwork that disguised true ownership, and backroom agreements that had been made without community input. Daniel learned that the hotel project was just the tip of the iceberg. The HOA had been involved in numerous questionable developments over the years, often pushing through zoning changes and permits that favored wealthy investors while disregarding the voices of ordinary citizens. There were records of meetings held behind closed doors, where decisions were made without transparency or accountability. It became evident that Karen Langley had cultivated a culture of secrecy designed to protect her interests and those of her allies at any cost. As he continued to dig, Daniel discovered evidence of bribery and kickbacks that had allowed developers to bypass regulations meant to protect the environment and preserve local history. Reports surfaced detailing ecological violations committed during construction, wetlands destroyed, trees illegally felled, all in pursuit of profit. Each revelation fueled his resolve to take action not only for his family, but for the community at large. Daniel knew he needed to build a compelling case against Karen and the HOA, one that would resonate with his neighbors and ultimately sway public opinion in their favor. He began organizing community meetings to share what he had uncovered, presenting clear evidence of corruption while appealing to their shared values of integrity and justice. The anger in the room was palpable as residents began to realize they had been misled for years. By rallying support around these discoveries, Daniel transformed from a lone fighter into a leader representing a movement. People who once felt powerless began to find their voices, emboldened by the truth. With every story shared and every piece of evidence presented, they collectively strengthened their determination to stand against Karen Langley's unchecked power. As momentum built within the community, Daniel felt invigorated by their growing unity. It was no longer just about reclaiming his family's land. It was about exposing a corrupt system that had operated in shadows for far too long. With newfound resolve, he prepared for the next steps in his fight, a legal battle that would not only seek justice for his family, but also aim to dismantle the corrupt practices that had plagued their town for decades. The stakes were high, but so was their commitment to restoring integrity and accountability within their community. In the midst of his investigation, Daniel Hall made a discovery that would change the course of his fight against the HOA. While sifting through boxes in the attic of his family home, he stumbled upon a treasure trove of meticulous documentation left behind by his grandfather. Each document was a testament to the values that had shaped their family over generations: hard work, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to their land. As he began to sort through the papers, Daniel felt a surge of connection to his grandfather's spirit. The documents included land deeds, correspondence with local officials, and detailed notes outlining agreements made during pivotal moments in their history. It was clear that his grandfather had anticipated challenges like the one Daniel now faced. He had meticulously recorded every detail, ensuring that future generations would have the knowledge needed to protect their heritage. Among these files, Daniel found vital evidence that would strengthen his case against Karen Langley and the HOA. There were records showing how the land had been passed down through generations with specific stipulations about its use, stipulations that directly contradicted the hotel's development. His grandfather's foresight in documenting these details provided a legal foundation upon which Daniel could build his argument. As he reviewed the archives, a sense of purpose washed over him. This was not just a collection of old papers, it was a legacy. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind: "Our land is our identity, and it must be protected." With each piece of evidence he uncovered, Daniel felt more empowered to reclaim not only his family's farm, but also the values instilled in him by those who came before. The documentation revealed numerous instances where local regulations had been overlooked or manipulated by the HOA under Karen's leadership. It detailed environmental assessments that had been ignored and permits obtained through dubious means. Armed with this information, Daniel knew he had a strong case to present, not just for himself, but for all those who had suffered under Karen's regime. Beyond legal implications, these documents embodied resilience and hope. They represented a fight for integrity, a chance to honor his grandfather's legacy by taking a stand against corruption. Inspired by this connection to his past, Daniel began to prepare presentations for community meetings, sharing not only the evidence but also the stories woven into each document. He spoke passionately about how their shared history was worth fighting for and how together they could reclaim what was rightfully theirs. As word spread about Daniel's findings, community members rallied around him with renewed vigor. They recognized that this fight extended beyond one family. It was about preserving their collective heritage against forces that sought to erase it. With each step forward, Daniel felt his grandfather's spirit guiding him, reminding him that the struggle for justice was not just about land, but about honoring the values they held dear, values that would inspire future generations to continue the fight for what truly mattered. As Daniel Hall continued his fight against the HOA, he discovered that he was not alone in his struggle. The community began to rally around him, ignited by the passion and determination he demonstrated in his quest to reclaim his family's farm. Neighbors who had once felt powerless began to see the potential for collective action, uniting under a common cause that transcended individual grievances. The first signs of solidarity emerged at a community meeting organized by Daniel. As he stepped up to share his findings about the HOA's corruption, he noticed the faces of familiar friends and neighbors nodding in agreement. They listened intently as he outlined the history of their land, the manipulative tactics of Karen Langley, and the importance of standing together. The atmosphere was charged with energy and resolve. It was clear that people were ready to take a stand. Daniel's story resonated deeply with many who had witnessed similar injustices. They shared their own experiences of feeling marginalized by Karen's aggressive development plans and her tight grip on local governance. As they exchanged stories, it became apparent that this fight was not solely about Daniel's family farm. It was about protecting their homes, their values, and their community's way of life. This newfound recognition of shared stakes fueled an urgency to act. In the weeks that followed, community members mobilized in various ways to support Daniel's cause. Some created flyers to spread awareness, while others organized rallies to draw attention to their plight. Local businesses offered resources, printing materials for petitions, or providing meeting spaces free of charge. Each act of solidarity helped amplify Daniel's message and showcased a community banding together against corruption. One evening, a group of residents gathered outside the hotel site, armed with signs demanding accountability and transparency. Their voices echoed through the streets, calling for justice not just for Daniel, but for all those who had been trampled underfoot by corporate greed. The sight of neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder sent waves of hope coursing through Daniel. It was a powerful reminder that they were fighting for something much larger than themselves. As support grew, so did Daniel's determination to face Karen Langley head-on. He understood that this collective strength was crucial in challenging her authority and dismantling the corrupt practices that had gone unchecked for too long. Every person who joined him in this fight added weight to their cause, amplifying their demands for justice in an environment where they had previously felt silenced. With each passing day, the community's solidarity bolstered Daniel's resolve, transforming him from a solitary fighter into a symbol of hope and resistance. Together, they stood as a formidable force against an entrenched system that sought to undermine their rights. They were no longer just individuals fighting for their own interests. They had become a united front, embodying the power of collective action in the face of injustice. With each rallying cry and every shared story, they reaffirmed their commitment to reclaiming not only Daniel's legacy, but their shared identity as guardians of their community's future. As Daniel Hall continued his fight against the HOA, new evidence emerged that would significantly bolster his case, not just in terms of reclaiming his family farm, but also in exposing the broader implications of the hotel's construction. Local environmental activists, inspired by Daniel's determination, began to investigate the ecological impact of the development. What they uncovered was alarming, a series of violations that painted the HOA and Karen Langley as a direct threat to the community's ecological integrity. Reports surfaced detailing how the hotel's construction had encroached on protected wetlands, vital habitats that supported local wildlife. These areas had been home to various species for generations, and their destruction posed a significant risk to the delicate ecosystem. Activists documented instances of heavy machinery operating in restricted zones, ignoring regulations designed to protect these critical environments. This information hit hard. It underscored not only the greed driving the project, but also the long-term consequences for their community. Armed with this evidence, Daniel organized a presentation for an upcoming community meeting. He wanted to ensure that everyone understood the stakes involved, not just for his family, but for the entire town. As he stood before his neighbors, he shared visuals of the affected areas, juxtaposing images of what had once thrived there against shots of the barren land now occupied by construction vehicles. The emotional weight of these images resonated deeply with everyone in attendance. The realization that their beloved land was being ravaged for profit galvanized the community even further. No longer was it merely about Daniel's struggle, it was about preserving their environment for future generations. People began to speak up about their concerns regarding water quality and potential flooding from disrupted natural drainage systems. The hotel wasn't just a building, it threatened the very essence of what made their community vibrant and alive. With this new layer of evidence, Daniel felt invigorated. He enlisted the help of environmental lawyers who specialized in ecological law, ready to take legal action against both Karen Langley and the HOA. They filed complaints citing multiple violations of environmental regulations, insisting that these issues could not be brushed aside as mere paperwork errors or bureaucratic oversights. The unfolding situation captured media attention, putting additional pressure on Karen and her associates. Public sentiment began to shift as residents recognized that their fight extended beyond personal property rights. It was a battle for their town's future and its natural resources. Daniel's determination had sparked a movement that united individuals from all walks of life, each committed to defending not only their homes but also the land that sustained them. As Daniel prepared for court, he knew he was armed with more than just his grandfather's documentation. He had rallied a community ready to stand together against corruption and environmental degradation. Daniel stared at the meticulously organized documents, his grandfather's careful handwriting detailing every transaction, every agreement, every legal foothold that could turn the tide in his favor. A slow smile crept onto his face. This was the break he needed. Sometimes the right discovery changes everything. Just like Daniel found the key to reclaiming his land, you might have just found your next favorite channel. Go ahead, hit subscribe. It might just be the best decision you make today. With newfound determination, Daniel knew it was time to act. He couldn't do this alone, and with his community behind him, he wouldn't have to. The fight was no longer one man's battle. It had become a collective effort to protect their heritage and ensure that their town remained a place where nature and community could thrive side by side. Against all odds, they were ready to challenge an entrenched system that sought to exploit both land and people for profit. As the day of the court hearing approached, Daniel Hall felt the full weight of the challenge ahead. This was more than just a legal battle against Karen Langley. It was a pivotal moment for the entire community. The stakes were high, and Daniel was acutely aware that their fight represented a broader struggle against corruption and injustice. In the days leading up to the showdown, he meticulously prepared his case, reviewing every piece of evidence he had gathered. The meticulous documentation left by his grandfather proved invaluable, offering a solid foundation for his claims. Daniel organized his arguments around key points: the illegalities surrounding the hotel's construction, the ecological violations that threatened their environment, and the manipulation of regulations designed to protect their community. He gathered testimonials from neighbors who had witnessed firsthand how Karen's actions had impacted their lives and livelihoods. Each story added depth to his narrative, illustrating the human cost of greed and exploitation. Daniel knew that if he could convey not just the facts but also the emotional toll of these injustices, he could sway public opinion in their favor. On the morning of the hearing, a palpable sense of tension filled the courtroom. Daniel arrived early, greeted by supportive faces from his community. Friends and neighbors filled the benches, united in their resolve to stand with him against Karen Langley and her formidable legal team. Their presence reinforced Daniel's determination. This was not just his fight, it was theirs as well. As the proceedings began, Karen entered with an air of confidence, flanked by her lawyers who were known for their aggressive tactics. Daniel felt a surge of anxiety at her commanding presence but quickly reminded himself of why he was there. He looked out into the crowd, his friends, family, and supporters, and drew strength from their unwavering belief in him. When it was finally time for Daniel to present his case, he stood tall before the judge. He spoke passionately about his family's history, weaving in stories from his grandfather's carefully preserved records. He articulated how the hotel's construction had not only stolen away a legacy, but also threatened the very fabric of their community's identity and environment. Daniel highlighted evidence of corruption and ecological violations with clarity and conviction. The facts were compelling. They painted a vivid picture of an HOA that had acted irresponsibly and without regard for those it was supposed to serve. As he presented each piece of evidence, he could see nods of agreement among his supporters in the audience. Despite Karen's attempts to undermine him with dismissive rhetoric and legal maneuvering, Daniel remained focused. He understood that this day was about more than winning a court case. It was about holding corrupt powers accountable and reclaiming dignity for himself and his community. As arguments concluded, Daniel took a moment to reflect on all that had brought him to this point: the love for his family land, the support of his community, and the wisdom passed down through generations. He knew that whatever the outcome, they had already won a significant victory by standing together and fighting back against extraordinary greed. and in that moment of unity, he felt an unshakable conviction that justice would prevail. As the court case unfolded, Karen Langley revealed the full extent of her ruthless nature. She was not about to let Daniel Hall's challenge jeopardize her carefully constructed empire. Determined to protect her interests, she resorted to underhanded tactics, employing dirty tricks and leveraging her political connections in a desperate bid to undermine Daniel's efforts. In the days following the initial court hearings, Daniel noticed an uptick in hostility directed toward him and his supporters. Anonymous threats began to surface, warning them to back off or face dire consequences. It became clear that someone was working behind the scenes to sow fear and discord among the community members who had rallied to his side. Karen was using intimidation tactics, hoping to silence dissent and erode the growing momentum behind Daniel's cause. On top of that, Karen orchestrated a smear campaign that targeted Daniel's character. She leveraged her influence with local media outlets, feeding them twisted narratives that painted him as an outsider looking to disrupt progress for personal gain. Articles began to circulate portraying him as reckless and ungrateful, casting doubt on his commitment to the community. Daniel watched in frustration as misinformation spread, knowing that many people might take these allegations at face value. In a particularly low blow, Karen sought out allies within local government, attempting to undermine Daniel's legal standing by pressuring officials to dismiss his claims. She made backdoor deals with influential figures, leveraging favors and financial incentives to maintain her grip on power. As Daniel fought to expose corruption within the HOA, he found himself battling against a well-oiled machine designed to protect its own interests at any cost. Despite these challenges, Daniel remained resolute. Each time he encountered a new obstacle engineered by Karen, he doubled down on his efforts. With the support of his community behind him, he worked tirelessly to counteract the damage caused by her smear campaign. He organized public forums where residents could voice their concerns and share their experiences with the HOA's mismanagement. They discussed how their homes and livelihoods had been affected by Karen's decisions, helping to shift public perception back in his favor. Daniel also gathered evidence of Karen's unethical dealings, documenting her attempts to manipulate local officials and intimidate community members. He understood that exposing her tactics would not only bolster his case, but also reinforce the shared resolve among residents who were tired of being bullied into silence. As tensions escalated between Daniel and Karen, it became evident that this battle was about more than just one man reclaiming his family farm. It was about standing up against a corrupt system that had operated unchecked for far too long. With each passing day, the stakes grew higher, but so did Daniel's determination. He knew that if he could withstand Karen's counterattacks and continue rallying support from his community, they could shine a light on the darkness she represented and fight for justice on their terms. As Daniel Hall faced the mounting pressures of his legal battle against Karen Langley and the HOA, he found himself leaning heavily on the wisdom and strategies of his ancestors. The rich history of his family, embodied in the meticulous documentation left by his grandfather, was not just a collection of papers. It was a wellspring of resilience and guidance. Each note, each letter, and every deed told a story of perseverance against adversity, reinforcing Daniel's resolve to fight for his heritage. In quiet moments, Daniel would sift through his grandfather's writings, drawing inspiration from the lessons embedded within. He recalled how his grandfather had fought for their land during difficult times, standing firm against those who sought to exploit it for profit. Those stories of courage became a source of strength for Daniel as he navigated the complexities of his own struggle. He understood that this fight was not merely about reclaiming property, it was about honoring the legacy of those who had come before him. With each strategic decision he made, Daniel incorporated the values instilled in him by his ancestors. He remembered stories about patience and careful planning, how his grandfather had often said that true strength lay in knowing when to act and when to wait. This wisdom guided Daniel as he prepared for court, encouraging him to remain steadfast in his approach while ensuring that he gathered all necessary evidence and support before making any bold moves. Furthermore, Daniel embraced the importance of community that had been a hallmark of his family's history. His ancestors had always emphasized collaboration and solidarity among neighbors, understanding that collective action could overcome even the most daunting challenges. As he rallied support from fellow townspeople, he felt their shared commitment echoing through generations, reminding him that they were all fighting for a common cause that transcended individual interests. During moments of doubt, When the weight of the fight felt overwhelming, Daniel would reflect on the sacrifices made by those who came before him. He imagined their faces during times of hardship, envisioning them standing beside him as he faced Karen's relentless tactics. This connection to his roots fueled his determination to persist in the face of adversity. As he prepared for each court appearance, Daniel infused his arguments with ancestral wisdom. He spoke passionately about not only reclaiming his family's land, but also preserving the values that define their community. He framed the case as a battle for justice, not just for himself, but for future generations who deserve to inherit a legacy rooted in integrity and respect for the environment. Ultimately, Daniel understood that this fight was about more than property rights. It was about reclaiming pride in their heritage and standing against forces that sought to erase their history. With each step forward, he carried with him the lessons passed down through generations, an unwavering reminder of resilience and hope, guiding him toward a future where justice could prevail. In embracing this legacy, he not only honored his ancestors but also inspired those around him to join in a collective effort against corruption and greed. The day of the climactic confrontation finally arrived, and Daniel Hall stepped into the courthouse with a mix of determination and apprehension. This was the moment he had been working toward for months, a chance to confront Karen Langley and the HOA head-on. The stakes were higher than ever, not only for Daniel but for his family's legacy and the future of his community. Inside the courtroom, an air of tension enveloped him. The judge presided over the proceedings, and the gallery was filled with supporters from the community, their faces reflecting a blend of hope and anxiety. Daniel could feel their eyes on him, a silent reminder that he was not alone in this fight. They believed in him, and he was determined to honor their faith. As the hearings began, Daniel presented his case with clarity and conviction. He carefully laid out the evidence he had gathered, documents that detailed the HOA's corrupt dealings, testimonies from neighbors about the negative impacts of the hotel project, and the ecological violations that had come to light. Each piece of evidence reinforced his argument that Karen's actions had not only harmed his family, but jeopardized the entire community. Karen, seated across the room with her legal team, exuded an air of confidence that belied her desperation. She countered Daniel's claims with aggressive tactics, attempting to discredit his character and question his motives. Her lawyers unleashed a barrage of legal jargon designed to confuse and intimidate. They painted Daniel as a reckless adversary willing to disrupt progress for personal gain, but he stood firm against their onslaught. With every challenge she posed, Daniel relied on his well-prepared strategy, integrating ancestral wisdom into his responses. He addressed each accusation calmly and methodically, reminding the court of the values that underpin their community: integrity, accountability, and respect for one another. The more Karen attempted to undermine him, the more resolute he became. Public opinion swirled around them like a tempest. News outlets covered the trial closely, capturing every moment as tensions escalated. Supporters rallied outside the courthouse with signs advocating for justice and transparency. The media attention added pressure on Karen and her team. It was no longer just a legal battle. It had become a public spectacle highlighting a clash between greed and principle. As closing arguments approached, Daniel took a moment to reflect on how far he had come. Memories of his grandfather's teachings surged through him like a guiding light. He felt connected to every ancestor who had fought for their land before him. With renewed vigor, he addressed the court one last time, emphasizing that this case was about more than just reclaiming property. It was about standing up against corruption that threatened to erode their shared identity. In those final moments, as he spoke passionately about justice and integrity, Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. The community stood behind him, an embodiment of collective strength ready to confront extraordinary greed. He finished with a call to action that echoed throughout the courtroom. "This is not merely my fight, it is our fight. Together we can reclaim not just our land, but our values." As he left the stand, Daniel knew they had given their all. Whatever the outcome might be, they had already won something invaluable: unity in the face of adversity and a renewed commitment to fight for what truly mattered. As the court proceedings reached their conclusion, it became increasingly clear that Daniel Hall's battle extended far beyond his personal loss. His fight to reclaim his family's farm had evolved into a broader struggle for justice, integrity, and the empowerment of ordinary citizens against the overwhelming forces of greed and corruption. What began as a deeply personal quest transformed into a rallying cry for everyone affected by the HOA's manipulations. The courtroom had become a microcosm of the larger societal issues at play. Daniel realized that his fight resonated with many who felt marginalized and oppressed by those in power. As stories from community members poured in, tales of lost homes, environmental degradation, and broken promises, it was evident that they were all part of something larger than themselves. They had been silenced for too long by an establishment that prioritized profit over people, and now they were ready to speak out. Throughout the trial, Daniel focused on highlighting the systemic issues that allowed corruption to flourish within their town. He understood that it was not just about one man versus an HOA. It was a reflection of a community reclaiming its voice against entrenched interests. With each piece of evidence he presented, he illustrated how Karen Langley and her allies had exploited their positions to line their own pockets while undermining the principles of fairness and accountability. As he spoke passionately about these injustices, Daniel saw how his words inspired others in the courtroom. Neighbors nodded in agreement, their faces filled with determination as they recognized their own struggles mirrored in his narrative. This was no longer just Daniel's fight, it had become theirs as well, a collective effort to stand against the tide of corruption threatening to engulf their town. The media coverage surrounding the trial further amplified this message. Reporters captured not only the legal battles, but also the emotional testimonies from residents who had banded together. Articles portrayed Daniel not just as a claimant seeking restitution, but as a beacon of hope for those yearning for change. His story sparked conversations beyond the courtroom, igniting discussions about ethics in local governance and the importance of community engagement. In this pivotal moment, Daniel understood that their fight was about reclaiming dignity and demanding accountability from those who wield power. The conclusion of the trial would be significant, but regardless of the outcome, they had already achieved something monumental: unity among ordinary people who refused to be pushed aside any longer. As he left the courtroom on that fateful day, Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of purpose wash over him. He knew he had ignited a movement, one rooted in justice and resilience that would continue long after the gavel fell. With community support behind him, he was prepared to face whatever came next. This battle was about more than just a farm. It was about ensuring that future generations inherited a world where fairness prevailed over exploitation, a world where ordinary citizens could rise up against extraordinary greed and reclaim their rightful place in shaping their own destinies. The courtroom fell silent as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict, the air thick with anticipation. Daniel Hall stood at the center of it all, flanked by his supporters, their eyes filled with a mix of hope and anxiety. The outcome of this case would not only determine the fate of his family's farm, but could also reshape the future of their community. As the judge announced the ruling, a wave of emotion swept over the room. The verdict was in Daniel's favor. He had successfully reclaimed his family's land, and the court recognized the extensive corruption and ecological violations tied to the HOA's actions. Cheers erupted from the gallery as supporters embraced one another, tears of relief streaming down faces that had long borne the weight of uncertainty. For Daniel, it was a moment of vindication, a culmination of months of struggle, perseverance, and unwavering community support. But beyond personal triumph, this victory symbolized a significant turning point for the entire town. The ruling sent a powerful message that corruption would not be tolerated and that ordinary citizens could stand up against entrenched interests. Daniel's fight had illuminated deep-seated issues within local governance that many had felt powerless to address. The community's collective resolve had proven that unity could challenge even the most formidable opponents. In the days following the verdict, conversations flourished throughout town about reform and accountability. Residents began to engage more actively in local politics, attending town hall meetings and demanding transparency from their elected officials. The impact of Daniel's battle reverberated beyond the courthouse walls. It ignited a movement for justice that inspired many to take ownership of their community's future. Daniel reflected on how far they had come since he first returned home to find his family's farm gone, replaced by a hotel and driven by greed. The journey had been fraught with challenges, yet it had also been filled with moments of profound connection and solidarity among neighbors who refused to be silenced. He understood now that their fight was not merely about reclaiming land. It was about reclaiming their voices, their rights, and their shared identity as custodians of their community. As he walked through what was once his grandfather's land, now restored back to its rightful place in his family's care, Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of hope. He envisioned a future where new generations would grow up understanding the importance of integrity and civic engagement. where they would learn to protect not just land, but also values that defined who they were as a community. While challenges lay ahead, Daniel knew they were better equipped than ever to face them together. The strength forged in this battle would serve as an enduring reminder that justice is worth fighting for, and that reform begins with individuals willing to stand up against corruption. With renewed purpose and commitment, Daniel looked forward to building a brighter future, not just for himself and his family, but for everyone who believed in justice, integrity, and the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change.